Okay, so our next speaker is someone that I have admired for many years. Stanton Friedman is a nuclear physicist, native of Canada, who has lived in New Jersey. Canada is a fabulous energy, a fabulous place, and he lives in New Brunswick. He is the foremost authority, academic authority, on the potential of extraterrestrial life, of UFOs. He is the originator, the first man who delved into the Roswell incident. This man has an incredible intellect, an incredible ability to support his beliefs. He's well studied, he's well prepared, and he is a man that deserves our respect and our appreciation. I'd like to ask you all for a standing ovation for Stanton Friedman. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. It's kind of funny to be part of the academic world. I spent time at the University of Chicago, and Carl Sagan and I were classmates for 3 years. Grew up in adjacent towns in New Jersey, as a matter of fact. And I miss him. I spoke at Cornell twice while Carl was there. I don't know if he told anybody that we had been classmates or not. Okay, this is, for me, a new presentation. I've spoken all over the world, and I just want to let you know that the whole world is interested in flying saucers when you give them a chance to admit it. They may withhold their showing of interest until it's safe, so to speak, when I come around. But I've spoken in 19 countries, 50 states, 10 provinces, and I will assure you that there are people interested in flying saucers all over the place. I will also assure you that at the end of my lecture, I normally ask how many people in the audience have seen a flying saucer, having defined my terms earlier. And as I tell people, I don't have guts enough to ask that question early in my talk, but typically it's 10% of the people in my audiences believe that they have seen a flying saucer. But then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. So there is still a bad attitude toward flying saucers. And that's a shame, because the big adventure for mankind is surely encountering those from outside. And it's coming. The encounters have already taken place all over the place. But things are going to be different when we recognize that we're not the big shots in the neighborhood. And in case you thought we were, I'm here to tell you that we're not. Put yourself in the position of an alien. Look at planet Earth. What do you see? Well, let's see. This year, military budget on planet Earth is $1 trillion. And how many kids died of starvation? You know, think about that. We have an awful lot of people who are having great difficulty staying alive. And I think from an alien viewpoint, we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. I mean, I hate to say that, because I wish it were other than that, but that's the way it is, I think. And what has intrigued me, I'm an old guy, and I can remember when people didn't think so much about life out there because the solar system is unique, we thought, and Earth is unique. After all, we got plenty of water, we got plenty of air, so this is the only planet in the solar system like that. We must be the top dogs. Oh well, that didn't last very long. The latest notion, just to give you a frame of reference here, is that within 100 light years of here, which is just down the street, really, there are 10,000 stars. And the latest data suggests there are 16,000 planets within 100 light years. So let's say most of them don't have any life, maybe only 10%. Look at how many civilizations that represents in the local neighborhood. We're suddenly not such big shots. Now, we probably have the distinction of being the only one in the neighborhood who's exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons, but I consider that a dubious distinction. Even though I'm a nuclear physicist, I can't say I'm proud of that. Now, if we had sent a spaceship off to the stars powered by nuclear fusion, that would be something to be proud of. One of the great mysteries. I've been interested in flying saucers for 59 years, and here are my conclusions. Simple-minded though they may seem. Some UFOs are of ET origin. Some. Most are not. Governments are hiding data. Now, I'm sure that shocks you, but not too much. I would further say there are no good anti-UFO arguments. I've been engaged in debates. Some of you may have heard me on Coast to Coast Radio, where I took on Dr. Seth Shostak of the SETI movement. SETI stands for Silly Effort to Investigate, you know that. But I've also debated Dr. Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society. The vote on those two, and they did take votes after the program, with Seth, it was 57% in my favor, 33% in his, and 10% who said, I don't know whether there are flying saucers or not. With Michael Shermer, the big-time skeptic, I got 80% of the vote. He got 20%. Thank you. And I've been approached recently by a philosophical foundation to maybe debate Michael again, which could be interesting. You'll hear about it if it's there. Anyway, we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft, successful cover-up of the best data, bodies, and wreckage for 70 years. Actually, much longer, but at least the modern UFO era. Now, there are objections to these conclusions, not surprisingly. Governments can't keep secrets. Everybody knows that. With the internet, somebody told me this, with the internet, you can't keep anything secret, as if people were publishing classified information on the internet. It may happen by accident, but not very often. These are some examples of things that were rather large size. The Manhattan Project to develop nuclear weapons involved many tens of thousands of people and billions of dollars. And it was done in secret. And it illustrated something else. When we tested our first atomic bomb, Trinity site in New Mexico, it was seen from 100 miles away. New Mexico's got clear skies. And people were calling the sheriff's department. What's going on? What happened? And there was an article in the paper that unfortunately there had been an ammunition dump that had blown up, but fortunately nobody was hurt. A few weeks later, oh yeah, that was the first test of a nuclear weapon, because then came Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was kept secret. The stealth aircraft. We spent $10 billion, Lockheed, to develop the stealth aircraft. All in secret for 10 years. Corona spy satellite. We knew the U-2 was going to have a limited life. The Russians would be shooting it down one of these days. And so we started work on the Corona spy satellite. There were 12 launches that were unsuccessful, in secret. Think of all the money that was involved in that. But the 13th one got more data than all the U-2 flights that had preceded it. Did we stand up and shout, look what we did? Nope. The Corona spy satellite was secret for 30 years. That first successful one got more data on Soviet military construction and stuff than all the U-2 flights that had preceded it. Did we brag about it? Not a bit. It was kept secret for 30 years. D-Day. Now, as you can imagine, it was very important that the Germans not know when D-Day was going to happen. They certainly knew we were thinking about attacking. That was kept secret. There were a lot of people who obviously had to know, but it was kept secret until after we landed, of course. The Enigma machine. We figured out how to decode the German secret military communications. And you'd think we would have bragged like crazy about that once the war was over. Nope. More than 20 years before we said anything about it. Why? Because there were other people using the same technology and were reading their mail too. Secrets can indeed be kept. Not just here, but in other parts of the world as well. Okay. Large-scale scientific studies. I need new glasses, but they weren't ready before I left. One of the most important studies, the biggest study ever done for Project Blue Book, which was ostensibly the only group in the United States concerned with UFOs. That wasn't true either, but, and I'll be talking about it in a bit. Project Blue Book Special Report 14, data on 3,201 sightings. They didn't distribute the report, distributed a press release, which had a few lies in it, which the newsmen never called out because they didn't bother to check. Data on 3,201 sightings, that's a pretty good sampling. And the work was done for the Air Force by Battelle Memorial Institute, and their name doesn't show up any place in it because their connection with the Air Force was classified. Another large-scale study, congressional hearings, 1968. 12 scientists testified, 6 in person, 6 in writing only. I was one of the latter group of 6. I'm the only one who's still alive. I was the youngest one, I guess. Excellent source of data from scientists who had given a serious look at UFOs, but you didn't hear much about it in the press. The Condon Report. We'll be talking more about each of these. University of Colorado spent $539,000 on a study of UFOs. Now, when you read the study, you find that 30% of the 117 cases they looked at couldn't be identified. That wasn't in the press release. They recommended Blue Book be closed. There was nothing to flying saucers. It was a lie, but they got away with it. The UFO experience, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. You know, it's kind of funny. Allen was the head of the astronomy department at Northwestern University. And for more than 20 years, he was the official scientific consultant to the Air Force's Project Blue Book. But when you read papers by debunking astronomers, they never mention Allen's study. You'd think that'd be the first one that they mentioned. There's some basic rules here. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. So these are crazy rules that apply whenever you're trying to debunk something, and governments know how to use them extremely well. Here's some of my own publications. I don't have copies of all of them here, some of them. There's a free list out there. There's plenty of good data, is the point. But often it's swamped by nonsense put out by the nasty, noisy negativists. The thing that's important here is this is one area of human investigation of strange phenomena, if you will. If all the others are as badly treated as this one is, we're in bad shape. How many cures are there for diseases that are brushed aside because of the bias and prejudice of the anti-community? It's a strange world we live in. Okay. Now, it used to be that we thought we Earthlings, I presume you're all Earthlings, I can't prove that, but we used to think that, hey, it's the only solar system around, and our planet Earth is the only one of the 9 or 8, depending on who you believe these days, planets that's covered with water and lots of oxygen. We're it. Now we've learned, one of my favorite satellites is the Kepler Satellite. That was named after Johannes Kepler, a great astronomer, I'll call him, who gave us a better picture of the orbits of the planets and things like that. Anyway, would you believe that that little satellite goes out and back, and it can actually pick up planets going across the face of a star, lots of light years away. The planet's small, star's large. It's, you know, about the sensitivity of if a butterfly went in front of your car headlights and you're looking at that from a mile away, and you can tell. I mean, it's that order of sophistication, how we managed to do that. But the latest words, would you believe, within 100 light years of here, there are 10,000 stars. And the latest data suggests that there are 16,000 planets. So let's say only 10% of them have life on them. So 1,600 planets with life within a lousy 100 light years? And we haven't been around very long. The Earth's been around 4 billion years, but there are planets out there that have been around 12 billion years. So suddenly, instead of us being king of the walk, so to speak, we're down in the mud. There's loads of planets out there. And if we would listen to the testimony of the best witnesses about UFOs, we'd say some of them are coming here. I'm certainly not saying every UFO is an alien spacecraft, but let's say only 10%. Biggest studies show 20%. That's quite enough to say that mankind is not so special after all. Okay. This is what the Secretary of the Air Force said when Project Blue Book was, Special Report 14 came out in the mid-50s. On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. Well, that takes care of the problem, doesn't it? Hey, only 3% couldn't be identified, right? Wrong. Totally wrong. Here's the database from Special Report 14. There are hundreds of charts, tables, graphs, and maps. But you'll notice the unknowns, last line there, 21.5%. Well, wait a minute, the Secretary of the Air Force said even the unknown 3%. Was he rounding off? Or was he lying? I think lying would be a better word for it. And you'll notice the next to the last category here, insufficient information. By definition, if there wasn't enough data available about a sighting, it had to be listed as insufficient information. And yet he said even the unknown 3% could have been identified if more complete observational data had been available. If there wasn't enough complete data, it was not listed as an unknown. I call this deceptive. That psychological there, you notice 1.5%. Some people will tell you, oh, half those witnesses are crazy. 1.5%, that's not very many. So this is the standard we need to go by. Biggest study ever done. Work done by a responsible professional group, Patel Memorial Institute, under contract to the Air Force, not some UFO society. And here are the results, but the public never heard about it. They were lied to. I know that's a shocking thought, that governments might lie, but keep that in mind. Now, they did a quality evaluation of all the sightings. Well, surely the unknowns were the ones that were poor quality reports, right? Wrong. You notice here, of the excellent sightings, the top line on the 35% were unknowns, and only 3.9% insufficient information. Of the poor sightings, it was only 18% unknown and 19% insufficient information. Exactly what you'd expect if we had really done a good job of separating the good stuff from the bad stuff. The better the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. The poorer, the more likely you got something else going on. But nobody ever saw this data. Certainly the media haven't. I'm not complaining about the media. I've had adequate press coverage. Not always accurate, but adequate. So this is what got me intrigued. When I first got a copy of this report in like 1961 at the University of California, Berkeley Library, and I was shocked because I'd read 10 books up to that time. None of them had mentioned Blue Book Special Report 14. Biggest study ever done, wasn't even mentioned in 10 books. Here's another two sources, just so you know that I'm not making these up. On the left, the UFO evidence published by the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Like over 3,000 cases investigated, about 18% could not be identified. On the right, the symposium on UFOs that I mentioned earlier, congressional hearings. There's the Condon report that I mentioned. It says scientific study. Well, I read the whole darn thing, and I would hardly call it a scientific study. I did have some interaction with Dr. Condon. He took a very biased attitude. Now, I don't know whether somebody blackmailed him into lying. That would be a good plot for a movie, wouldn't it? It's almost 900 pages long, and there are places where it really falls down in terms of science. And Dr. Condon even said something to the effect that in the next 10,000 years, we have no expectation there will be any alien visitors to the planet. Now, how could any rational scientist, and Condon was a good scientist, I hate to admit it, but as a member of the American Physical Society that I am, and he was president of the American Physical Society at one point, president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. There are certain effects in physics that are named after him. How can any rational person say that in 10,000 years there's not going to be any visits to planet Earth? Would you bet on 100 years? Who knows? Look back 200. How many people predicted fission and fusion and lasers and a zillion other things that we take for granted? I mean, look at this. I got a laser in my hand, cheap pointer. Look at this computer sitting in front of me. What would that have been worth 60 years ago? You know, totally incredible. So we need to recognize that we have had long periods of time in which very respectable, responsible people have said very stupid things. Oh yes, there's the exact quote from Dr. Condon. Travel of men over interstellar distances in the foreseeable future seems now to be quite out of the question. It is safe to assume that no intelligent life outside our solar system has any possibility of visiting Earth anytime in the next 10,000 years. What an incredible statement to make. Does any of us know anything about alien civilizations out there? It seems to assume that there is intelligent life outside of our system, but what is he saying? We banned them? You got to pay a toll when you get close? Ridiculous thing. And as I say, I honestly believe that Ed Condon was a fine scientist. So why would he say something so stupid? That raises questions. I said silliness. I should have said stupidity, but I'm a nice guy, you know. There's Dr. Hynek's book. Now, I could never get Alan to look at the reports about interstellar travel, but he's got a lot of good cases in here that couldn't be explained. And whenever astronomers write anti-UFO stuff, they never talk about Hynek's book, which I find fascinating. Now, another objection is you can't get here from there. Everybody knows it's too far. Hundreds of light years, thousands of light years. Would take too long, take too much energy. Can't stand the acceleration. I have on a number of occasions asked professional audiences, how long does it take at 1G, the force of gravity right here, to get close to the speed of light? And I make it a multiple choice question. 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, or 1 year. How many think it's 1,000? And I go down the line. The actual answer is 1 year to get close to the speed of light. Not 1,000, and many people thought 1,000, or 100, or 10. 1 lousy year. And why does that matter? Well, one of the crazier things I'll say is that Albert Einstein, as part of relativity, finally deduced that as you get close to the speed of light, and this is the craziest thing I'll say today, time slows down for things moving that fast. And don't ask me why. That's the way God created the universe. It's the simplest explanation I can give you. But at 99.9% of the speed of light, you know, you can go 37 light years in less than 2 years, I think it is. It's a small amount. I haven't traveled close to the speed of light, and as far as I know, none of you have yet. Maybe our grandchildren will. I've got a great-grandson, maybe in his time frame we will. But these are false obstacles. Many of the calculations, the pronouncements from on high, say that they'd have to come from hundreds of light years away. Why? As I told you, there are 10,000 stars within 100 light years. And there are many stars that have near neighbors less than a light year away. We're out in the boondocks here. But the next star over from the sun is 4.3 light years. Is that the norm? Well, there are plenty of places in our local neighborhood where there are stars less than a light year apart. And it seems to me the closer you are to your neighbors, the more likely you are to try to figure out how to get there, or how they might get to bother you. The first thing in a society is to protect you against outside intruders, right? So if you got nearby neighbors, you better watch out. You don't want to be surprised. So take too much energy. How much energy does it take? Well, that depends on which way you do it. And we all know that if you want to go around the world, you could do it like Magellan did. His ship took 3 years to go around the world. Then there was around the world in 80 days. Fiction, but still, it was exciting to think of that. You know how long it takes the space station to go around the world? 95 minutes. That's a big jump from 95 minutes to 3 years, isn't it? The important thing is that progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You don't keep doing the same thing you've been doing, only better. You switch. A laser is not a better light bulb. Nuclear weapon is not the same as just a lot of dynamite. Now, I suppose you'd expect that a nuclear physicist would talk about things nuclear, but there's a good reason for it. A World War II U-boat, Nazi submarine, you see it in all the crossword puzzles, you know, could stay underwater for about a day. But you need air for the diesel engines. You got to come up. In 1960, one of our early nuclear-powered submarines went around the world underwater in 60 days. That's a big jump. Today's nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, 18 years without refueling. Think about that for a minute. You don't need to be next to a tanker. 18 years without refueling. If you're a ship captain, it's pretty nice to be able to do that. I worked on a study of fusion for deep space propulsion. Fusion is the process that produces the energy in all the stars. Essentially, all the energy in the universe is produced by nuclear fusion. We didn't know about that until 1938. But in our 1962 study, the simple-minded response to the study was, if you want to go, all it takes is dough. Put up the money and you can do it. Now, sometimes it's a lot of money. If you want an idea of how large amounts of money were used for special programs, when I was working on nuclear airplanes for General Electric, Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department, Cincinnati, 1956 to 1959. In 1958, our budget was $100 million. That was a lot of money in 1958. It's kind of a lot of money today, too, for that matter. We employed 3,400 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. That wasn't 6 professors and 20 grad students. We did all kinds of interesting things, but we never flew a nuclear-powered airplane, unfortunately, I think. I worked on nuclear fission rockets. 3 different organizations worked on them. I was at Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab, Aerojet General in Sacramento, California, built one, as we had. And Los Alamos, they were the kingpins. Ours operated at a power level of 1,100 megawatts. Hoover Dam produces 2,000 megawatts. Our nuclear rocket engine was less than 8 feet in diameter. Aerojet General produced one, 1,000 megawatts. Los Alamos, 4,000 megawatts, twice the power of Hoover Dam, that big. Of course, we had those successful tests, and then the program was canceled. I guess nobody had guts enough to decide, let's go out there, folks. But we knew how to do it. That was in 1969. And most people look at you when you say nuclear rockets. What are you talking about? I'm talking about nuclear rocket engines, ground tested successfully. It was a very impressive program until it got canceled. Now, as I said, the biggest source of energy in the universe is nuclear fusion. I'll show you some hardware. You can see 2 jet engines down at the bottom of that. There's a reactor inside that cylindrical portion in the middle there. 2 jet engines here. You put this on a railroad car because it gets radioactive and you got to move it remotely. And this was tested. I hate to tell you the name of the place where it was tested, but it was Jackass Flats, Nevada. I don't know who came up with that one. This is what a a flight-style nuclear system would look like. Reactor in the middle, jet engines down here. Very exciting program until it was canceled. There's a nuclear ramjet. Spent a few tens of millions of dollars on that. It was supposed to be carried aloft by a B-52, and then you could drop a nuclear weapon on any place on Earth. We're good at that. Nuclear weapons is our thinking way about this sort of thing. This is what nuclear rocket engines would look like. You see the size of the man, so you see they're not very large. Liquid hydrogen is the propellant. Comes in cold and goes out hot. Near absolute zero and in 4,000 degrees within a few feet. I'll tell you, when we ran the first test, we're listening back in Pittsburgh while this test is going on in Nevada. And the big question was, how long would it last? The maximum could be an hour, because you couldn't store enough liquid hydrogen, but would it last just a few minutes before the fuel elements got kicked out the back end? We didn't know. It was very exciting as they, over the PA system, 5 minutes nominal temperature and pressure, 10 minutes nominal temperature and pressure. We went the full 60 minutes. And boy, was I relieved. I had been asked 2 weeks earlier to come up with some notion about the heating rates in the control parts of the reactor. We're not sure we've got them cooled enough, Stan. So I had to run some experiments, give them some numbers, and I said, yeah, you're okay. But when we started this test, I was suddenly realizing that if this thing flopped, somebody's going to point at me. You said it was okay, Friedman. Fortunately, it didn't flop. It went well. But it's a strange feeling. These things are real. These aren't artist concepts that never got built. This is what the system actually looked like. Reactor in here, out at Jackass Flats. There's the Los Alamos one. Area 51 is off to the left over the mountain. You can see the tanks. You don't want to be standing next to one of these things when they're running, incidentally. It's a good way to get cooked in a hurry. Those are tanks of liquid hydrogen that you can see back there. And the plume. There's a nuclear-powered submarine around the world underwater. What would Christopher Columbus have said if you told him that? He said, lock him up. There's that nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Oh, this is just a chart to show that you can handle acceleration. It depends on the direction with regard to the body. Did you ever notice the astronauts go up on their back? Not on their feet, feet to head with the force being? No, back to front. Because it turns out that we humans can stand a lot more force back to front than foot to head. So we've done a lot of studying on this kind of thing. A trained pilot can perform a tracking mission while being accelerated at 14 Gs for 2 minutes. That's an acceleration. 1 G is 21 miles per hour per second. So if your car is accelerating at 1 G, at the end of 3 seconds, you'd be going 3 times 21, or 63 miles an hour per second. Pretty hot stuff. But, so there's been a lot of work done on these things. You're not walking around drinking a beer while this is going on. Now, fusion. Don't let the equations there bother you. That's helium and deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. The important number on here, 18.3 million electron volts. One fusion reaction. Now, what's that got to do with anything? Well, normal chemical reactions, lighting a match, that sort of stuff, 5, 10, 20 electron volts. One nuclear fusion reaction, 18 18 million electron volts. So we're not saying it's just a little bit better, a lot better. It's a great deal better. And you produce the energy in the form of charged particles, which can be accelerated by electric and magnetic fields, which is kind of neat too. So the particles go that way and you go that way. Now, to give you an idea here, I hate to talk about bombs, but that's what you expect from a nuclear guy anyway. A big bomb in 1944 was a 10-ton blockbuster. Released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite, and it took a big B-29 to carry it. Wow! That was in 1944. In 1945, the first atomic bomb, a fission device, released the energy of about 15,000 tons of dynamite. That's a pretty big jump. 1952, 10 million tons for the first fusion bomb. Mike, it was called. Don't ask me why. And then the Russians set off a really big one in 1961. Tsar-Bomba released the energy of 51 million tons of TNT. Dynamite, if you will. One bomb, 51 million tons of TNT. So why would anybody go nuclear? There's a heck of a lot more energy available than any other way that we know at this point in time. And so, frankly, it scares the heck out of me. I don't like the idea of nuclear bombs because I think, you know, our work should be for the living and not for the killing. But this is the real world we live in now. These aren't imaginary numbers that I dreamed up. We have exploded on this planet 2,000 nuclear weapons. Fortunately, only 2 on people so far. But it behooves us to recall how evil we can be. And I'm not saying that it wasn't the right thing to do, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It saved 1 million lives. But it means we have to be thinking about what we're doing and who gets their hands on these bombs. And the reverse question, of course, what would our neighbors in the local neighborhood think about us having exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons? Don't you think they'd be a little concerned? And there have been many instances where UFOs have been seen around nuclear projects. There's a famous one in Montana, and I talked to the guy who was down in the pit where there were 10 ICBMs with nuclear warheads on them. UFO shows up over the gate. The guy radios down to the commander. He thought he was joking. You know, call me when something happens. Ha! A few minutes later, he called and was obviously distressed. And then 10 ICBMs went offline, one after the other. Supposedly, that's impossible. They're independently wired and stuff just to protect you in case something goes wrong in one, you don't lose all your reactive capability. 10 went offline. And we found out later the Russians had a situation in which a UFO showed up and a bunch went online. Scared the heck out of a number of people. So I can't say I blame aliens for wanting to find out what our capability is, but I think they'd want to report back. We got a bunch of idiots over there. We better be careful. In other words, these are real numbers, real situations. On one of those big bombs, the fire cloud, if you will, there, was 3 miles wide. Can you imagine that? Not 300 yards, 3 miles. So this is the real world in which we live. Now, Frank Drake is a noted astronomer. He's been pushing for listening with radio telescopes for signals from aliens, because undoubtedly they'd want to send us signals, right? I don't know why they'd want to send us signals. How do they know what technology to use if they haven't been here? I mean, a lot of different ways of producing radio signals. And Frank suggested at one point in time that there might be as many as 8,000 places in the galaxy that could send us signals. With the latest data, we can say that, let's see, 1.6 planets per star, 200 billion stars in the galaxy. That's 300 billion planets, rough numbers. That's a long way from 8,000. So I think our thinking, you can see why I say silly effort to investigate. Why would anybody send us a signal? You think Columbus waited to go west until he got a signal from the natives? Did he send them a signal first? Hey guys, here we come. That's absurd. Okay, never mind this saucer. Do you see the guys who are driving? Does a nuclear physicist believe that in little green men? Well, they're not green. There are many reports of little beings associated with flying saucers. There's a guy named Ted Phillips in Missouri. He's literally from Missouri, right over next to Arkansas. Pretty close, anyway. Ted has collected more than 5,000 reports of close encounters, that is, of things that were seen on or near the ground that left behind physical markings, if you will. Burn circles, burn rings, landing gear marks, footprints. About 1/6 of the cases involved reports of little beings associated with the craft. So they're coming here, and they're, I'll say manned, but it could be womaned, aliened, whatever word what do you use to describe a vehicle that's got intelligent beings on board? I don't know their nature, but we know that many people have been abducted. Many people have observed these beings. Many people have seen the marks on the ground, lots of them. Here's a typical physical trace case. Delphos, Kansas. Ronnie Johnson, age 16, was 50 feet away, doing his chores for the evening. Looks up and sees a thing about 10 feet in diameter, glowing bright, a foot or two off the ground. He's standing there gawking at the thing, and then it takes off. He dashes into the house, tells his parents what he saw. They laughed at him. They called the sheriff's office, which did show up and check. They checked for radioactivity, of course, didn't find any. But that soil is different in the ring. Down 14 inches, it's different from the surrounding soil. And it wouldn't grow anything for years. Too high a level of soluble minerals. Too salty, if you will, to grow anything. That's one of thousands of cases. To give you an idea, that when I say differences in the dirt, the ring soil is on the right, the normal soil nearby is on the left. And please don't complain about the sophisticated soil retention device in the picture. Well, that's an accurate description, isn't it? You can call it a paper plate if you want, it's all right. Now we'll get to the real heart of the matter. Betty and Barney Hill and their dog. Very famous sighting, 1961. Betty's a social worker. Worked for the state of New Hampshire. Barney worked for the post office, but was on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission, 1961. Okay, they're driving along, coming back from Toronto, as a matter of fact, and they see a light in the sky, and it follows them, and it's a lot closer, and they stop the car. Barney has binoculars. Here's this thing sitting a couple hundred feet away. Row of windows, can see through the windows with the binoculars. There are beings inside staring at him. Scared the heck out of him, to tell you the truth. Dashes back to their car. They're going to capture us. They drive off, and then there's uncertainty what happened. But they got home 2 hours later than they're supposed to get home, in the middle of the night. And Betty had some dreams about being taken on board a saucer. Didn't know what to make of that, but they developed physical problems. Barney had ulcers suddenly. And his doctor finally said, "Barney, I can't do anything more for you. I think you need to see a psychiatrist." Thinking that maybe the fact that it was a mixed racial couple, this is 1961, they must be confused people or whatever, despite their standing in the community. And they were very lucky to run across Dr. Benjamin Simon, psychiatrist. He ran a hospital during World War II for shell shock war veterans. Today we'd say PTSD. Same difference. Wherever there's war, there's going to be people who are damaged mentally. You know, your buddy's head gets blown off next to you. Let's say that's a very traumatic experience. Why him and not me? And, you know. So Dr. Simon became an expert at helping people get back to be amongst the living by using medical hypnosis, have them relive the experience and redirect the concerns and so forth and so on. So Betty and Barney were very lucky to find him. And they had weekly sessions for months. And a book came out, The Interrupted Journey, and it only was a book. This was a private experience as far as they were concerned. And Dr. Simon didn't want to go public. This is medical information. He could get kicked out of the AMA for that, you know. But a reporter, somebody broke a confidence and told a reporter about this because they had talked to a small group of people about their experience on board the craft. And they got over it. They found the place where it had happened. A book came out, The Interrupted Journey by John G. Fuller. Got a lot of attention. They were afraid they were going to lose their jobs. They didn't want anything like this out in public. But it turned out to be a best-selling book. Newspaper treated it decently, not fully accurately, but decently. And so that was the first abduction experience that got a lot of attention, justifiably. And so that began the era of what might be called the abduction era. Apparently, the aliens are picking up specimens. Catch and release program, I call it. You know, stick a needle here, scrape a little skin there, cut a little hair here. You know, we got a lot of different specimens because the aliens seem to be more or less alike each other, but Earthlings vary considerably. You may have noticed that. Big ones, small ones, old ones, young ones, fat ones, thin ones, crazy ones, not so crazy. So who knows whether these are graduate students doing their thesis research on your typical Earthling, you know. One of the exciting things was that Betty remembered under hypnosis asking the aliens where they were from, and he showed her this, what seemed to be a three-dimensional model or something. And "Where are you on the map?" she said. And he said, "Do you know where you are?" "I don't know anything about astronomy." "Well, how can I tell you where I'm from if you don't know where you're at?" End of discussion. You can imagine Dr. Simon listening to this, and what do I make out of this? Well, he gives Betty a post-hypnotic suggestion. If she can remember what the map looked like, please draw it later on. And she does, and it's in the book, that drawing there. There were trade routes and occasional expeditions and some other crazy science fiction stuff, it sounded like. Well, a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish did something nobody else had ever done. She built more than 20 models of three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood to see if she could find a pattern that matched what Betty had drawn. And she finally found one. There's Marjorie. That's me, believe it or not. This was a few years ago, as I think you can tell. She's a sculptress, and this is what the aliens look like. This is one of her biggest models. They wouldn't let her take the books out of the library that listed the coordinates of the stars, so she had to hand copy them all. Incredible feat. Here's one that matched angle for angle, line length for line length. And the base stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. That's the constellation Reticulum. That means the net. And they're only an eighth of a light year apart. They're only 39 light years from here. That's a very different situation from, we don't have anybody close by. Less than a light year apart. So it's kind of exciting to think about it. But it points out how different the situations are. Some stars have other stars close, and some it's very far. And I presume the closer your nearest neighbor, the sooner you're going to try to figure out how to get there. Because you worry about them getting there to bother you, of course. I published an article in a magazine, and I convinced the editor of Astronomy magazine to publish an article about Marjorie's work. Got more response than anything they'd ever published before. And over the course of a year, they had about a dozen responses. Then they put out this 32-page full-color booklet. They sold 10,000 copies immediately. This has never happened before in popular astronomy. And then Carl Sagan, whose name is on the front there, his lawyer complained, like you're taking advantage of his name. So they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I bought 16,000 copies of this, all of which I sold eventually. Took a while, but there was a lot of interest, to say the least, in this. Here's what the aliens looked like. Now, this book was written less than 10 years ago by myself and Betty's niece, Kathleen Marden, who heard about this experience the day after it happened because Betty called her sister, Kathy's mother. She spent an awful lot of time transcribing all the tapes and all that sort of stuff. And I have a few copies left out there. Captured. There's Kathy. I'll talk about Roswell for just a few minutes. Yeah, we have a few. I had some people tell me, well, it couldn't have been Al Franken, as a matter of fact, who's gotten a lot of publicity lately. We did a television program, and, well, it couldn't have been much of a story if it only appeared in a Roswell paper. I had sent the people who did the program copies, front page stories like these. This is not the Roswell paper, it's the Chicago Daily News, for goodness sakes. But Army finds air saucer on ranch in New Mexico. It went all over the world, this story. The Roswell Daily Record was probably the smallest newspaper in which the story appeared. Somebody tried to tell me, Stan, you've got it wrong. RAAF, that's Royal Australian Air Force. No, it's Roswell Army Airfield, thank you. Anyway, I heard about this strictly by accident. I was giving a lecture at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The students took me to a local television station. I was supposed to do 3 interviews to promote the lecture that night. This is in 1978. And I did the first 2, and the third reporter was nowhere to be found. We didn't have cell phones running around all that time. And the station manager, he's giving me coffee. He didn't want to lose the interview, but where the heck's the reporter? And out of the blue, he says, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. Brilliant investigator that I am. I said, who's he? His answer changed my life. He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you're talking about when he was in the military. What? Where'd that come from? What do you know about him? He lives in Houma, Louisiana. That didn't tell me a damn thing because I didn't know where Houma was. I was there later to talk to Jesse. He's a great guy, rolled ham radio buddies. You ought to talk to him. Okay, the reporter showed up, had a great day at the university. Next morning from the airport, I called information. Now, be wary, many of the younger generation don't know that you can call information. You know, you got to look it on a computer. You want a number, you go to your computer, right? And so I got a number for Jesse. I called him, talked to him. He remembered Bill Allen, the name of the guy at the television station. And he told me his story. Why did he talk to you, Stan, was one of the first comments I heard. Well, because his name was in the papers. His picture was in a lot of papers. He could hardly say he had nothing to do with that. And this is 1978, which is a lot of years after 1947. But that got me started, and within a year, a colleague and I found 62 people who were at the base at that time. Now they're just about all dead, of course, 70 years later. But anyway, it was an important experience, and I wish to stress that the military group at Roswell Army Airfield was the most elite military group in the entire world. Why? Very simple. They're the only ones who had atom bombs. They dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and 2 more in a series of tests, and another series 2 years later. These weren't dinks. You know, Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer for this group. Remember, there was a Cold War, and for a while we had a monopoly on nuclear weapons and so forth? Not very long. The head of that program, General, was asked, how long would we keep the secret of the atomic bomb before the Russians figured out how it worked? Well, he went through a whole long litany of why the Russians weren't going to find out very quickly. At least 8 years. A year and 3 months later, the Russians tested their first bomb. We wouldn't even have a radar net around the United States because we knew that nobody else was going to be threatening us. And we knew that they didn't have a means for delivering an atomic bomb even if they had one. But it turns out that we took a B-29 that we had left there and they copied it. Made Japanese copies. That used to be this phrase, you know. Anyway, we're not always very sharp at being able to understand what other people are doing or capable of doing. Okay, that's New Mexico. The yellow area is the largest military base in the United States, White Sands Missile Range. Roswell is in the southeast. Its time has moved on. There's Jesse Marcel. His boss, the government set out to cover this up. And Jesse was made to be posing with this weather balloon wreckage, and that was the cover story. There have been many other cover stories, all of which were lies. The real answer is what happened? An intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft happened. That's what. It crashed, bodies were found, strange wreckage was found, and the cover-up was in but big, but good. And the people who were involved in this were pretty sharp. The head of the 509th, the group at Roswell, went on to become a 4-star general. And was Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force when he died of a massive heart attack in the 60s. He wasn't a dink. He knew what he was doing, and he followed orders to get the press off our backs, as somebody put it. There's General Roger Ramey, who was head of the 8th Air Force at the time. Thomas Jefferson Dubose next to him, and you'll notice Ramey is holding a piece of paper in his hand. And I just saw a program the other day in which somebody said, oh, we weren't able to read anything special about that. I totally disagree, but it really says victims of the wreck. Since when do weather balloons have victims of wrecks? There's Tommy Dubose. I talked to him firsthand. He told me about taking the call from Washington saying, get the press off our backs, I don't care how you do it. And that's what they did. I got that firsthand from Tommy. The rancher was given a cover story too. The Air Force put out 2 reports. They lied again. I love the explanation of crash test dummies. The dummy's the one in the middle, in case you can't tell. Notice he's in Air Force gear. 6 feet tall, 175 pounds. I talked to the man on the right who was in charge of the program. They didn't drop the first one of these until 6 years after Roswell. We have time travel for crash test dummies. But it was in the New York Times. That's good enough, isn't it? I'll go through this very quickly. A roll of film showed up in the mail, and on it was a story that President Truman supposedly set up a group in 1947, Operation Majestic 12, accountable only to the president, to deal with this UFO stuff. And the question is whether the documents are genuine, and it's a long story, which I won't go into, because it lists the members of this committee. Secret, top secret magic, wow. And these are real people listed as being part of this. A couple of them have been head of the CIA, and incredible people. And there's a memo. It continues to be my feeling that any future considerations relative to the ultimate disposition of this matter should rest solely with the office of the President, following appropriate discussions with yourself, that's Secretary of Defense Forrestal, and Dr. Bush, and the Director of Central Intelligence. Anyway, it's a long, involved story. I'm convinced that this document, which was found that there are 3 legitimate ones. This one's important because this was found at the Library of Congress Manuscript Division. It's a memo mentioning Majestic 12. And is it legitimate or not? Well, I said it was for a whole variety of reasons. Mr. Philip Klass, one of the biggest debunkers, said it wasn't. He challenged me to find any other documents done in the same size and style pica type. He'd pay me $100 each up to a maximum of 10. But it turns out he'd never been to the Eisenhower Library. I'd spent weeks there, and I was going there. I found 14, same size and style type, copied them, sent him an invoice, and he paid me. And got madder than hell when I included a copy of this check in something that I wrote. Too bad, Phil. Here's my book about that. Another one, this is by Jesse Marcel Jr., who was a medical doctor who also handled wreckage. Here's my crash at Corona. We have on tape, DVD, 27 first-hand witnesses, all of whom were dead except one. 70 years ago, not surprising. Does the government cover things up? Well, yes, they do, as a matter of fact. CIA and NSA, National Security Agency, I love this line. Deny in toto. We can't declassify any words on this page. This is the NSA. We've got 156 pages that look just like this, one sentence per page. Everything else is whited out. Government cover up anything? Yes, darn it. A very important memo. General Carol Bolender was asked, what should we do about Project Blue Book, because Condon had said we should get rid of it. Close it, it's not doing anything. So he wrote a memo, which we didn't see until 10 years later. Moreover, reports of unidentified flying objects, which could affect national security, are made in accordance with JNAP 146, Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. An incredible statement. We were always told Blue Book was it, the only group. However, as already stated, reports of UFOs which could affect national security would continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures designed for this purpose. We'd never been told that. I called General Bolender. He was still alive. I don't know how to talk across that line. And I said, it sounds to me like you're saying there are two separate channels of communication. Yes. One for reports which could affect national security, and one for those that don't. General Bolender was an engineer on the Lunar Excursion Module. Not a dink. You remember how much was riding on our successful landing on the moon. The Russians have been clobbering us, technologically speaking. So Bolender was heavily involved in something very important. This was something else very important. I don't know if anybody else has talked to him. There was a memo, a government regulation. If they don't land when instructed to do so, shoot them down. I've had 7 different people tell me that at their base, planes were sent up after UFOs, which never came back. And if I've heard of 7 of those, there's got to be more. There's Dr. Seth Shostak. We debated. I won. Enrico Fermi, one of the great scientists, one of the reasons I went to the University of Chicago, he asked a question after a conversation at lunch at Los Alamos about, so where is everybody? They'd been talking about it wouldn't take more than a few million years to colonize the galaxy. The Fermi paradox. I say the answer is very straightforward. We don't know where everybody is. We know some of them aliens are coming here. And we also know the government's lying about them. Now, Fermi would have appreciated that because he was the one who put together the first nuclear chain reaction for the atomic bomb program. He knew about secrecy. One book. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. Got about 5 minutes. Okay. Anybody got a question? Got a question? Oh, okay.
Did the actual UFO crash take place in the city of Roswell?
No, the ranch where the crash occurred is in Corona, believe it or not. The same name as the spy satellite. Don't ask me if there's a connection because I don't know if there is. It's a tiny little town. I drove through there once, and it was on the 50th anniversary of Roswell, and there was a sign on what used to be a theater. Forget about Roswell, it all happened here. I'll be out at my table. Some of my books are still around. Thank you.
And so can we have another round of applause for Stanton Friedman? Stanton will be speaking again tomorrow. Part 2. He has a few books left that he's signing just right there in the lobby. Thank you very much. Thank you for